What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Pride Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, joined by my guy Morgan here. And Morgan, we're going to do something a little bit different. I feel like this is what maybe the first or maybe the second time we've actually gotten to talk NFL draft at this point. And with it only being a couple weeks away, I feel like we got to kind of give the people something to expect when it comes down to what they should, kind of be hoping for, or again, kind of expect Brad Holmes to be doing when it comes to draft night, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I know it's getting to be that time. Like, shoot, we're at a month basically right now as it stands today on the 28th of March. So yeah, it's getting to be that time. Hopefully finalizing some plans over at Pride of Detroit. But yeah, we're going to start doing these hopefully just a little bit more regularly as the mock drafts change, as we get closer to the actual draft. So exciting. And it's going to be cool to discuss all this because we're at a good point here, man. The roster's good. This is just like a few tweaks here and there, and they could be ready to roll again, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like that's the fun thing about the draft. When you have a team that, again, I'm not necessarily fully complete, but there's not as many glaring holes at this point of the offseason as there was, when the season first originally ended. The Lions went out and got some quality pieces for their secondary. They added a high quality offensive lineman, a high quality defensive lineman. And now Brad Holmes can kind of go into the draft and do what he's basically been doing since he got here, which is go best player available. And so, Morgan, I think if we can kind of just go through some of these mock drafts and just kind of again, evaluate what some of these draft analysts are saying, who they believe is a good fit for the Lions, and we can kind of be the judges and the jury to a certain extent on whether or not, they're going down the right rabbit hole, or if this is probably a pick that's a little too far left field.
Right. And it's always interesting to have these, like to do the roundups like this and see what everyone's thinking, especially a lot of the national guys who, try to look at each team's needs and try to be cognizant of like where each team is, which is difficult. I'm not going to lie. Like I always think that how do these guys do it? Because we follow the Lions really closely and, we keep our, hands on the pulse of the rest of the league, but not to the extent we follow the Lions. So I definitely think this is a good exercise because it kind of lets us know what other people are thinking. Well, like you said, Brad Holmes might be thinking something completely different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, listen, we compiled 10 mock drafts, or at least 10, more recent mock drafts that have taken place and their picks that they made for the Lions for their very first pick. So this is all round one, or as you'll kind of see as we go through this, the first pick that the Lions make. So Morgan, let's start with Bucky Brooks here, who we're actually going to talk about Bucky Brooks' mock and Matt Miller's mock draft because they make the same pick for the Lions at 29. Bucky had his most recent mock draft come out yesterday, while Matt Miller had a 7-round mock draft actually go out today. So these guys are kind of thinking the same thing, with the Lions potentially taking Chop Robinson at pick 29. And what do you think, about that idea of the Lions, selecting Chop?
No, I really like Chop, right? Like a lot of people have probably seen a lot of him because he played in the Big Ten, played for Penn State, tested crazy. Is just one of those really, really rare athletes in terms of like what he can do movement wise, right? You hear that term movement in the NBA a lot, like, the guys who just have crazy athleticism, quick, twitchy. And that's what you're going to get with Chop off the edge. He can really bend off the edge in terms of how low he gets around the corner. I think he could stand to learn some more rush moves and have a better rush plan, but that'll just come with time and repetition, right? And, some people are scared off a little bit by his lack of production in college, but you just never really know how that goes. And I really think he could be productive in Aaron Glenn's defense if they did go this way. What about you, Miko?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're someone who's a fan of James Houston, because we know a lot of fans are fans of James Houston, I think Chop can do a lot of the same things that James Houston, the Lions are hoping that he can do for them as a pass rusher. I think Chop can do that and then some. Like you said, there is the questions about his lack of production while he was at Penn State, but like you said, you kind of get him into a more NFL friendly system. You start to work on certain aspects of his game, and I think he could be one of those guys opposite Aiden Hutchinson that could, help him or help each other get to those double-digit sack numbers consistently year after year. Because one thing that you don't have to worry about with Chop, like you illustrated perfectly, is that he has the athletic profile. He has the bend. He has the speed. You just need to teach him some technical things to, I think, make him a little bit more formidable for the NFL game.
Yeah, and exactly. It's perfectly said. It's going to just come with time and repetition too. Very few, like the really special edge rushers coming out of college already have like a pretty developed bag of moves, right?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that go towards the top of the draft, like being picked 1 overall, 2 overall, etc. Like Hutch at 2, you see why he was immediately productive. While his game's not perfect, it was pro ready, and I do think Chop's game is pro ready, especially you get in here and you work with the Lions coaching staff, who's been shown to really been good at developing players over time, right? You see it
Yeah.
time and time again all over the roster. So I think it'd be fun. It would be an injection of fun into this defense because he's one of those guys that could win quick on the edge. And we talked about it in our last video, looking at the tape of Carlton Davis. But if your pass rush, if you can rush the quarterback with only 4 or 5 players, that's going to help your back end immensely. And it just all, it goes around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move to the next mock draft that we have here, and it's another NFL Network draft analyst in Daniel Jeremiah. So in his most recent mock draft, he still has the Lions taking Kool-Aid McKinstry, the cornerback out of Alabama. Now, this is a pick that I'm a huge fan of, and I feel like Kool-Aid's kind of gotten overlooked as the draft process has kind of gone along. Going, at the start of the college football season, he was, by a lot of people's admission, like CB1 going into that college season, and he's now kind of fallen to about like CB4, maybe 3, depending on who you talk to. But Kool-Aid is somebody that I would still be very excited if the Lions picked. I think he's very competent as a man-to-man corner. I think he has great ball skills. I think he's very physical when it comes down to playing in the run game. And I think he has good size as well to kind of give Aaron Glenn what he's looking for on the outside as a physical long corner as well.
Yeah, me and you are lockstep on this pick too, Miko, because Kool-Aid, like you said, was cornerback 1 coming in. You don't play for Nick Saban in the secondary unless you understand what's going on, like you're an intelligent DB, and then obviously the physical tools got to be there, and they're all there with Kool-Aid. He's a prototypical NFL corner with his size and speed, and he might, like, this is a case like where the Lions roster is better, right? He might not play like right away. Like he's going to play, but he might not start. There's a world, man. It's going to be a competitive group out there. But because of the Lions, they don't really have anyone, especially on the outside, signed long term. I would really like this pick because it would go a long way just addressing the position for the future, right?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that is also another thing that could really benefit the Lions making this type of pick is that you have veteran guys already on the roster. And it's almost like you get that Darius Slay type of environment when you invite Kool-Aid in, is that he gets to learn behind these vets. But at the same time, probably still challenge for a CB2 spot if he wanted it, if he's able to get it over the likes of a Meek Robertson, or, again, if Emmanuel Mosley's ready to compete, maybe he even beats out Emmanuel Mosley. But Kool-Aid, at least, would have that type of, game to him that he could be a viable option as a young corner that could start for you. I also want to point out, I feel like he's also kind of fallen victim to the same thing that we kind of realized today with Carlton Davis, is just because you have another good corner playing opposite of you and that person's on the rise, that some people tend to think that you've fallen off. And that's not really the case. I think it's just a situation where Kool-Aid has been so consistent. Terrion Arnold, who's the other corner out of Alabama that, again, some people see as CB1 or CB2, had a really good year this past year. So again, I think this is more so just Alabama being Alabama and having so many quality players.
Yeah, and it sometimes works against them because their defense is so talented. Although this defense wasn't as talented as it has been in years past for Alabama. But yeah, he'd be pro ready, man. I would like McKinstry a lot. He might not play a ton in 2024, but like we said, it would go a long way in just solidifying things for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our next pick, I think, is kind of the same situation here with Zierlein, who's also another NFL draft analyst over at NFL Network. He has the Lions taking Darius Robinson, the defensive lineman out of Missouri. And this is another person that once the combine kind of kicked off, once they started having those media availabilities, the story, I think, with Darius Robinson has got a lot of people feeling like, oh, he's perfect a perfect fit for this Lions culture. But I also think he's also a really talented lineman as well that could provide this defense with a lot of versatility.
Yeah, and he could slide in and play at the 3 technique. He's 6'5", 285 pounds. So he's a big, formidable guy. Played in the SEC, so he's pro ready. Just kind of the same conversation we were having about Kool-Aid. So yeah, I would like this pick. My only concern is is it a little bit redundant to what the Lions already have in spades in terms of, you have Josh Paschal, you have John Kaminsky. I would, almost like someone with a little more pass rushing chops, and maybe someone who could, play a lot of snaps on the edge and be really productive. But again, we could be wrong, and Darius Robinson could end up being a really good pro and be really productive as a 5 tech and being the big end in Aaron Glenn's defense. So I would like this one. It's in the same vein as McKinstry. He might not see a ton of snaps in 2024 or the vast majority, but he's going to play and he's going to be part of the rotation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the one thing that I would take away from a player like Robinson is that he is somebody that you can move into the rotation fairly easily. And he's someone that I could see as a potential replacement for John Kaminsky if that's a route that the Lions decided to go in, because like you said, he can kick inside. He does have that same type of length and size as John Kaminsky does. But yeah, like you, I do have some concerns about Darius Robinson over the likes of maybe like a Chop Robinson, in that, like you said, Darius Robinson doesn't quite have the pass rushing toolkit or even necessarily the athletic profile. He does feel like a really big defensive lineman that you can move to the outside or the inside. But at the same time, again, going back to what kind of has a lot of people down on Chop, Darius Robinson does have the numbers, right? Where he's had 8, sacks in the season a couple years in a row. So even with very limited pass rushing skills per se, he still has found ways to be productive even in the SEC. So again, he's somebody that I could see the Lions potentially draft, but I'm kind of with you. It does feel a little redundant considering some of the other bigger edge options that they already have on this defensive line.
Yeah, and I think some of that is a product of where the Lions are picking, at 29 overall. Just that's that we know edge is a premium position in the NFL. And if you're picking at 29, you're not going to have the first pick of the litter. It's just unfortunately how it goes when you're a good football team. So a different position the Lions are in this year, and it's going to be new for a lot of us that are not, pardon me, very old, because we haven't experienced this. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, because it would be nice to have your your swing at a Jared Verse. But such is life.
Man, Jared Verse is nasty too.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about him. I was going to say, we're going to talk about him in a minute, because there's another player that's on this mock draft list that got to see a lot of Jared Verse, and it was a good battle between the two of them. But the first couple mock drafts that we've gone through have been heavy on the defensive side of the football. We finally get our first offensive pick from Mel Kiper Jr. over at ESPN, where he has the Lions taking Xavier Legette, the wide receiver out of South Carolina. And I think this is a pick that you and I both like, considering what the type of player that Legette is or has been at South Carolina.
Yeah, big, physical. If you've watched Legette play, you know the book. He's listed 6'1", 221 pounds, so very much in that A.J. Brown, Anquan Bolden style of build, where he's going to play some bully ball, man. You're going to have a tough time jamming him at the line of scrimmage. If he gets the ball, he's tough to bring down. He's just a big physical cat. So I would like this pick, because we always bring it up, but you're adding this X receiver, right? Which is what Legette fits in terms of profile. And then we talk about 11 personnel, and you'd have the likes of Xavier Legette, Amon-Ra St. Brown at the Y, your slot, Jamison Williams at the Z, Sam Laporta as your move tight end, and either Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery at running back. And you're cooking. That's tough to stop. And Legette might be that final piece to really make this Lions offense truly terrifying.
Yeah, and I think the thing that also makes him really attractive as a prospect is, like you said, you could obviously slot him in as your X wide receiver, but he has that versatility, right? Where he can play the Z, he can play the slot, And so now your offense becomes even that much more unpredictable because so many different pieces of this offense can move all across your offense, you know, as far as being able to line up in different places. Um, and again, he does so much as he can be a deep threat. He can be someone that works in the short and intermediate game. He can take a handoff, much like, you know, JMO or Saint have done as well. So like you start to have all these guys that can do so many different things for your offense. Like you said, it in one sense puts together the puzzle for the Lions offense, but at the same time it presents a jigsaw puzzle for opposing defenses as well.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to stop. Like it's just too much firepower on the field at a given time. So I'm right there with you. It'd be tough, man. You'd have a lot of defensive coordinators losing sleep at night, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to our next pick, and we have our first local pick from the Detroit Free Press from Dave Burkett here, and he's going with Grah Barton, the offensive lineman out of Duke. And this is a pick that like is very interesting. I don't know how much have a priority it is now that the Lions have gone out and signed Kevin Zeitler, but the Lions do still need offensive line help, and Barton is someone that can definitely slide over into the interior of this Lions offensive line and possibly compete for a starting spot, or at least at the end of the day, develop behind a really veteran offensive line as well.
Right, Nico. It's crazy, but if you take Barton at 29, there's a world, with a very realistic world, where he's not going to play in 2024. He might be maybe he's your extra tackle, like when you want to go heavy instead of having Dan Skipper in there in motion. Maybe you do it with Grah Barton. Played tackle and center at Duke. Big, strong kid, 6'5", over 310 pounds. But yeah, projects as an interior offensive lineman in the NFL. And I think long-term, he'd probably be your right guard if you do, like if Zeitler's here on a 1-year deal, but that's not always guaranteed. If he plays really well, he could definitely be back. But yeah, that's crazy, but it's where the roster's at, and very similar to what we were talking about with Darius Robinson and Kool-Aid. Like there's no guarantee your 29th overall pick starts.
Yeah, and I think Barton would be a good long-term investment because, again, if you watch his tape on what he does in the run game, oh, dude's nasty in the run game.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's a big reason why a lot of analysts are projecting him to move to the interior of the offensive line, because he does such a good job of, you know, utilizing his athletic gifts to be able to move people in the run game. His pass sets as a tackle are kind of sloppy, in my opinion, and I don't think, you know, there's another player that we're going to talk about here. I think in comparison between the two, I think one of these players can turn into a really good tackle with some repetition and just some time to develop. Barton to me feels like a guard through and through, or potentially a center, but like one of the two, he seems like somebody that you want to have in the middle of your offensive line.
Yeah, like you said, it's his game. That's how his game projects right now, and it can get better with some time with Hank Fraley and like learning from Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker and so on, Zeitler, Graham Glasgow, good Lord. But yeah, best offensive line in the league. But yeah, Graham Barton would, like very similar to Kool-Aid, would be a good long-term investment to ensure that your offensive line stays in that elite category, which it very much needs to do with how the roster is currently constructed, right? Yeah, I'm all about this. Anytime, I would love if this pick was invested in the offensive line.
So I think the same thing could be said for the next pick that we're going to talk about. And this would be like almost like a little bit of deja vu if the Lions were to make this pick of Jackson Powers Johnson going back to Oregon to pick an offensive lineman, and that offensive lineman also wearing the number 58. Jackson Powers Johnson looks like, I've heard some people say like this might be the best center in the class. Like he looks every bit of like a top tier center from like the tape that I've watched of him. And I think this is a pick that I don't think fans would jump out of their seat about, but I think if you look at the long-term picture, this would be a really solid pick to doing what you were just saying a minute ago, keeping that high-powered offensive line a high-powered unit going forward.
Yep. Yeah, he'd come in, and if you take Jackson Powers Johnson, this would maybe be my favorite pick they could do at offensive line if they stay at 29, like if the usual suspects are off the board, like Fuaga and so on. But yeah, you get Jackson Powers Johnson, he'd come in, he would compete with Graham Glasgow and Zeitler. He'd push them pretty hard, in my opinion. He's got a nasty streak, a little bit cleaner, in terms of pass protection than Barton and the guy we're going to talk about next, and just in my opinion. But yeah, another road grader in terms of run blocking, and has he wants to very akin to Panay, wants to
he
belittle you.
yeah, he wants to bury you. He
Yeah.
100% wants to just like take your soul from you. And I want to dream. I want to dream in a world and live in a world where, again, after this season, if the Lions decide to move on for Kevin Zeitler, you slide in Jackson Powers Johnson in between Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell, and you just constantly run to that side of your offensive line because you just know bodies are going to be putting in the earth. So like, I love I love the optics of possibly making that pick.
For sure, man. You'd be basically just caving like holes in defenses consistently, like very much like they did last year when they were really rolling. Like, you're just, Jameer is not getting touched until he's like 8 yards down the field, like just nasty work, but we love it.
Yeah. And then the last offensive lineman that we have here is Jordan Morgan, who was the pick from Trevor Sikkema over at PFF, tackle out of Arizona. This is the pick that, again, I don't think people would be excited about. I think you get a lot of people saying a lot of people asking like who this person is. But this, again, I think could serve two purposes in a long-term plan for the Lions, where early on, if Jordan Morgan is able to carve out a starting role for himself, he's probably playing in your interior line somewhere. But possibly one day also working to be your right tackle of the future, or potentially your left tackle of the future. I don't know how well he can develop into one of those, but I mean, he does have that versatility to play across that offensive line.
Yeah, it would, again, similar situation that we're in, talking about these last several picks. Probably not going to start in 2024. Could use some time with Hank Fraley, getting everything, polished and right. Would definitely, in my opinion, slot in as the Lions swing tackle. Like, he could played left tackle at college and at Arizona, could play tackle guard, in my opinion, in the league, just depending on where you put him. But yeah, he would definitely project as their swing tackle in case, God forbid, Panay or Decker miss any time. And then he would compete, be that extra offensive lineman. Matt Nelson's gone. I don't think they're bringing back Dan Skipper. What did they bring back Dan Skipper?
I think they did bring back Dan Skipper already.
You're right.
Yeah.
So he compete with, he's going to beat Dan Skipper out. Dan Skipper might be in some trouble.
I was going to say, because Jordan Morgan can move like this, like, there's another, like, he's another reason. That's another reason why he's another guy that's being projected to maybe move to the interior, because, again, he's great in the run game, but he also moves really well in space. But, again, I could see a world where he develops into a good tackle. They just got to work on his pass sets. The same thing with Barton. They both have sloppy pass sets, in my opinion, at this current moment. But I think if you work with them, more so with Morgan, I think he could really develop into a solid, potentially solid right tackle. But again, you never know. Maybe a really good left tackle if they decide that they want to keep Panay at right.
Right. And long term, I do think the Lions will move Panay to the left. So if you take someone like Jordan Morgan or Kingsley, Panay's brother, Sua Mata'ia, they would probably play right tackle long term. But for now, I would love to bring back Decker, side note, on just like a quick little, like, veteran extension, bring his cap number down a bit.
Yeah.
Keep him here another 2 years, just because you don't let good tackles walk out the door if you have them.
No, absolutely not. And speaking of good tackles, we're going to go back to the defensive side of the football. And this pick by Jeff Risdon here is, only way I can probably describe it is just the rich getting richer, because if the Lions were to get Johnny Newton, oh my Lord. In the same way that we were talking about with Jackson Powers Johnson, where like you would just cave in the entire right side of, or I guess it would be the left side of opposing defenses. With Johnny Newton, like you would clearly shut down run games. If you're talking about a rotation that has Aleem McNeil, DJ Reader, Johnny Newton, and then, I don't know, just throw in another defensive tackle to just rotate with those guys, like that's a pretty dangerous unit, Morgan.
Yeah, man, I like Johnny Newton a lot. Depending on who you ask, he's probably the second or third best. Maybe some have him the first best 3 technique in this class. So 3 technique, lining up on the outside shoulder of that guard, attacking half the man, 6'1", 300 pounds. And he's just kind of hell on wheels, man. Like, he's in that build where he wants to get under you. active hands, only going to get better as a pro with the Lions coaching staff. This one would be, this could maybe my second favorite pick of these behind Jackson Powers Johnson of this mock draft compilation that we're doing. I would love this because he would just long-term, man, if your rotation on the interior is Johnny Newton, Aleem, DJ Reader, and Broderick Martin, you're well on your way to doing some good things. Yeah.
100% agree.
Yep.
And then last but not least, this is a mock draft that we actually kind of started talking about a little bit, with the POD crew yesterday, because it kind of dropped yesterday in The Athletic. Standig had the Lions making a trade. So trading out of the 29th pick with the Las Vegas Raiders and picking up pick number 44, pick 112, and a 2025 third rounder with the potential of it being a second rounder. And with that 44th pick, the Lions would be picking Chris Braswell. This is my least favorite pick of the mock. You were talking about how Newton and Powers Jackson may be like your first and second favorites of these mocks. This is by far my least favorite. And it's not the trade. The trade, it's good value. I think it would be good value, but I wouldn't like the return in the pick for that trade. I think Chris Braswell is very likely to go in the second round. He's obviously done a lot at Alabama as like that edge / Sam linebacker type role. But I just think there would be better options possibly available than what you could get from Chris Braswell.
Yeah, and he's a good athlete, not great. Played at Bama, so he's got the Bama pedigree. Well, it would likely project the only way I would not really not like this pick, maybe it would be more palatable, is if the Lions, they draft him at 44 if this trade were to take place, and they come out and say yeah, we're about to really play him at the Sam a lot. So for those who aren't familiar with the Sam, as a Sam linebacker in the Lions scheme and Aaron Glenn's scheme, he's going to stand up with, in a 2-point stance on the edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And from there, he can rush the passer. He can drop into, coverage if you're playing zone. And then, he can cover. He ran a 4.6. You don't want him doing it a ton, but in theory, he could potentially run with some tight ends and running backs and cover them in some short areas. But that would be the idea. And if you're going to do that, sure, I guess I get the pick a little bit, but not my favorite by any means, just because it doesn't really, I get it's 44 overall and you get what you get, but I don't know. Me and you are on the same page with this too. I wouldn't love it.
Yeah, I think that, again, even if you didn't make the trade, I think if you had the ability to make the pick of a Chop Robinson in that position, I would rather take Chop at 29. If you did make the trade, because let's say Chop and Darius Robinson aren't available, Kool-Aid's not available, any of the guys that we just listed, right, are not available to you for some reason, which one of these guys a couple of these guys would have to be available at 29, but let's just say they're not. I still think the likelihood of Adisa Isaac, the other pass rusher out of Penn State, would be a really good option. Somebody that could still play that edge / Sam linebacker role. We've talked about, I think in passing, Keon Coleman would be a really good option. In a certain situation like that. I also like the opportunity of probably even picking like a Braylon Trice if you're still looking for an edge rusher. Braylon Trice out of Washington would be a really good option, I think, as somebody that could play that Sam linebacker role. Probably would have to work with him on his pass coverage, but definitely would have this toolkit there to be a pass rusher opposite or on the same side as Aiden Hutchinson, which would just be dangerous in my opinion.
Yeah, I like Braylon Trice too. Every time you watch Washington, which I'm sure a lot of people did last year, he popped, in my opinion, when you watch Washington live. So I'd be with all of that. I know you really like Adisa Isaac. I like his game too. We saw plenty of him at Penn State. But yeah, Braswell, I don't know. We could be wrong, right? Braswell could be a really good pro. But who knows, right? That's the roll of the dice. But I almost don't want to trade back, man. I'd be a little sad, right? The draft's in Detroit, let's do it.
Yeah, something about trading out of the first round when the draft is in your city would just not feel right. I think you would get a lot of boos.
It'd be a letdown. It's gonna be a long.
Yeah, it would be a letdown for a lot of people. But at the same time, the mantra seems to be here in Detroit, we're gonna let Brad cook. And so these are just a couple of the mock drafts that are out there. Who knows? Maybe we'll end up doing a mock draft on this channel, to the chagrin of Jeremy. But again, at least give you guys an idea of how we could see the Lions, building this roster going forward. But Any final thoughts, Morgan, on these mock drafts, or just anything else? Any other name that you want to throw out there, as somebody else that you would probably consider as an option for the Lions in the first round?
I already mentioned Kingsley Suamataia, the tackle guard prospect, whatever you want to call him, from BYU. Penei Sewell's cousin, trains with Penei. Freaky athlete, would address the position long term. But other than that, I really like, for the most part, what some of the national guys and some of the local guys are picking in terms of the mock draft. So it's going to be interesting because of where they're picking, but I do think they can get a player at 29 that can make a difference, even if they're not going to necessarily start every game.
No, completely agree. And if you guys are looking for, again, a better way of being able to digest all these mock drafts, because I'm sure it's really difficult and stressful to try and keep track of what so many people are projecting for the Lions to do, Eric does an amazing job of doing a mock draft roundup that is always available on prideofdetroit.com. I'll make sure to link that in the description below. But if you want to be able to check that out, he does a good job of, again, also breaking it down by position, so you can see how many of these draft analysts are in this favor of thinking that the Lions may draft a receiver or an offensive lineman or defensive lineman, whatever the case may be. Eric always does a good job of putting that content together for you guys. So that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Like I said, be sure to check out prideofdetroit.com. Stay tuned there for any more news or updates that may be coming out about the Detroit Lions. And also be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell over here on the POD YouTube channel. That way you can be notified anytime we upload new videos or decide to go live over here on YouTube. So with all that said, I'm Miko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll be sure to catch you guys in the next one.